welcome to our live board meeting. What was going to be the last of our foundational documents, but will not be. This will be, Raymond will be joining us next week, not this week. It's actually kind of perfect because he was like, oh yeah, Friday the 13th. And I was like, spooky. And then I went and had a shower and realized that the very first time I'd gone live on TogetherTec for our board meeting, when it was only just me, was a Friday the 13th. And so now we'll be invoking theoretically the foundational documents on a Friday the 13th, which is kind of cool. So
that's our lucky day.
Yep. So what do we do though? What do we do today? If we don't have him, we can go over the documents one more time, possibly start talking about what we're going to do next, which is look at where to incorporate, right? So
yeah, I think both of those are good things. Radek wasn't at didn't make our last meeting, and we said that we were going to plow ahead without him, so maybe we should double check, make sure you're okay with that.
He came at the end of it, and we updated him.
Okay, that's right. I forgot because I was like,
yes, I joined late, and I was totally okay with everything you've done. So
yeah,
good.
One of the things Brentley had given the thumbs up on it, but Adrian Radek, I don't know if you saw it, just as kind of payment to Raymond, since we have it anyway, and since we don't have actual money to give him, that since these are live and public, that I put these in a playlist, a separate playlist. They're also in the board meeting playlist, but a different playlist. So we could just say, hey, whatever you want to do with this, whether you want to, edit it down or whether you just want to give it to people, that this is us working through for what will be 9 hours as of next week. This is our 8th hour.
Right. So, yeah. Hopefully cutting it down to 10 minutes.
Just say, I'm not cutting it down. That's not within my, but
no. I'm saying if he wants to.
Yes, exactly.
Like for testimonials and for like, hey, if you want to see 4 people struggle through the vision and mission, then
and maybe we could do that this week instead of next week. But I was thinking, theoretically, this was going to be our last week, and Raymond would have been here. But we can actually give video testimonials, right? Like have one section where we are saying how this process has been for us, as opposed to watching the 9 hours, right? And then that would be an easier part to click it.
My only thought is I'd like to see the funnel. Although he may come in and say we're missing some gaps because I don't. Yeah, so I'd like to. I'm not sure. I want to feel the whole thing before we give some testimonials.
Yeah,
but yeah.
That makes sense. To do that as well. It has been even if we don't have our foundational documents, even if we didn't do it right, it was still a good method to go through to have those in-depth conversations and realize what we kind of had decided and hadn't decided and where we're on the same page. So it's been a good process. But do someone want to bring up the document? We can go through it, read it.
Sure. Zoom in a little bit first. And close down some of my other windows. There we go.
That's been a great one. All right. And do what we did last time to see who starts reading.
What section are we doing, sorry?
We're just kind of reading through the whole thing, right? To see if we're kind of like what we did last time.
So just sort of like a recap?
Yeah. Vision. A world where abundant resources are available to projects that have long-term benefits to most beings. Mission. We facilitate shared resources for projects that have long-term benefits to most beings. Try to just keep going. Councils. Primary council. Description. Stewards all assets listed herein. Well, the primary council stewards all assets listed herein. That was said weirdly. Currencies. Primary council influences currencies, PCICs. That is what is PCIC? Primary council influence currency. It's literally right there. I was like, what does that stand for again? Description represents influence on the primary council. Assignment procedures. Join the Facebook group. Keep showing up onto Friday meetings, and a PCIC holder will propose assigning PCIC. Right now, we have the initial holdings of each of us having 1. Mission metrics. Currencies. These are what we talked about. This is what we wanted Raymond for, right? Because these are just proposed ideas of how do we know the mission is being accomplished? Here are some ways that we can measure it. On active brand channels. So that was the idea. What was that? one brand channels? Active brand channels. Is that like TogetherTec's YouTube channel or
Yeah,
more?
so that one is like, across YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, X number of channels where there's, some amount, like let's say at least one post a week. So it's sort of saying like we're actually, actively talking to people and talking to the market. Projects involved, just the number of projects involved, just like it says, right? So right now that would be like, so solution raising, wiki election, reason score, hyper logos, etc. Like, because we're our projects, essentially. Total project audience, just as projects come on board, right? If each of our projects have our own audience, what's that total? So if we have, one giant project or 1,000 small projects, just what's the total for the audience size amongst all of them? And then total active participants in the actual TogetherTec community, which would most likely be, a subset of the people involved in the projects, at least initially, and then possibly over time we'll get some other sort of types of people on there, like, audience of other projects, like, I don't know, weird meta audience. How many people or projects are using the shared resources? So as we do things like get things like the StreamYard, or, if we were to, I don't know, sign up for a paid version of Google Drive or whatever they're calling that now. Just any of the paid tools that we're saying, hey, let's get together and sort of make use of these tools, so we're getting our money's worth. And then the satisfaction surveys, which I think is sort of tied to the idea of the net promoter score, just to see how well we are bringing about our vision statement. So like how well the things that we say that we're trying to do and our sort of goals and our just how we want to operate, how well are we achieving that? Are we actually doing what we set out to do? I actually kind of want to go mark this down as something that needs feedback. That's going to be from Raymond, just so they're easy to pinpoint. So that was the mission metric currencies, and then the other currencies was the participation currency. We earn one participation currency for each meeting attended, and then those can sort of, sorry, that wasn't just for meetings attended. It's starting with the meetings attended, and then might involve more actions in the future. I think the example there was like when Carrie was doing the onboarding for the Facebook group. We figured that should probably be a participation currency instead, where the idea here is that would likely be one of the factors that would decide if you get the PCIC. Then for the assets, like we talked about, the main purpose of this is to steward the assets. So right now that is the brand, which isn't much yet, but it'll grow over time. And for the most part, it kind of encompasses all the other assets. There's the TogetherTec domain name and the website. There's the Facebook group and the YouTube channel. And then of course, as that grows, we'll add it to the list. We have the proposal process. So when we're trying to make a proposal to sort of change how TogetherTec works, and like things in this document, the bylaws, whatever. So there's the way that you initiate it, and that a proposal is initiated when at least 2 PCIC holders are present in a board meeting. So it does have to happen in a board meeting. There has to be at least 2 to even sort of start talking about it, because otherwise it's just a talking face on a screen talking about something, and it's probably not going to be a board meeting anyway. We have the proposal iteration methodology, where proposals may be iterated when at least 2 PCIC holders are present in a board meeting. I imagine that would commonly happen the first time right after it's initiated, and then if it lives for a couple of weeks, it might be brought up multiple times as it's iterated through. And then to actually resolve it, or to vote on whether it's going to happen or not, at least 75% of PCIC holders must be present to come to a consensus on a resolution with no holders blocking. So quorum is at least 75%, and I guess basically everybody has veto. And then upon positive resolution, all details of the initiation and iterations are recorded along with the details of the final proposal. Details should include who initiated the proposal, the iterations, and who participated in the resolution. And this is another one where that's a question for Raymond. Jurisdiction and dispute resolution. The notes from our last time There was something about sort of where do we want to actually incorporate, and sort of what are we actually going to be doing with it. We talked about open collective, where like, is that a part of it? Is this, we're just going to have one corporation maybe per country? We're still not, I think, 100% sure on how that part works for open collective, but having the one corporation that can sort of work as like the, not even parent, but like gatekeeper for open collective building, or I don't know how to word it, but the incorporation to help other people take advantage of the open collective feature set. And then the other things to consider were sort of before it even gets to, you know, jurisdictional issues in whatever we end up having that people would sign where this actually comes into play. We probably want some steps saying, hey, let's try to make some steps internally to resolve whatever disputes before we get the courts involved. Talking about the legal structure of the organization, both, you know, where it's incorporated and what type of incorporation and what does that mean. Again, where is it incorporated? How does that affect where the members are from? I guess that's actually both project owners and audience. Those are sort of two separate things. I think project owners are probably the more important side of that as far as the jurisdiction stuff goes, because I'm not sure what the audience would really be doing with TogetherTec. There's the areas for dispute, so the actual topics that would be disputed. Where does this actually come into play? That's probably something that we'd want to talk with Raymond about. I think we all have ideas, but to see exactly sort of, you know, to understand why this is in the actual document and where he's seen it play out, so we can figure out some of the nuances. And then when do we start to incorporate in multiple countries? At some point, that's probably going to happen, where we'll, you know, be a multinational group. And then, you know, when does that happen, and what are the steps that would make us sort of say, okay, it's time to start thinking about incorporating an X country. For what we're all initially accountable for Facebook, Bentley has been doing the weekly project updates. I think he's going to keep doing those. Jubilee is going to be handling the member admission, at least for now. I'm not sure if Carrie will be coming back at some point to do that, but for now, that's Jubilee. For StreamYard, I'll be posting the weekly post for this meeting, and depending on if the Saturday meeting or other meetings come back, I'll be doing those as well. For the website, Jubilee owns the domain name, so any changes to that, at least for now, we'll have to go through her. She'll have to make the changes to the domain name setup to point to different sites, etc. And then once he has the login, Bentley said he'll make some changes to the website. It sounds like that's probably just going to be a one-time change to sort of say, here's where we're at now. And then if things change in the future where we sort of need a better website, more up to date, etc., we'll talk about that then. And then Jubilee is going to manage the playlists on YouTube for all these different sessions that are going on the TogetherTec YouTube channel, to organize them into playlists, like a board meeting playlist. Then for the operational notes, the only thing we have here is that, at least for right now, our board meetings are at 12 p.m. Pacific on Fridays.
All right, awesome. We're up to date. We're there. Is there anything else we can do on this without, like, is there anything else that Radek, when we read through it, you wanted to add, since you weren't here for the last week when we went through it more in depth? Or, I mean, anyone can add something, but, and you're on mute, just in case you.
I think it's okay. I'm not going to make it any more complicated than it needs to be, so I will refrain from adding anything. It's good.
Well, it's the first time one of us has stated that. Good thing Radek's here. So make it more complex. Let's not do it. Because if we're good with this till next
Yeah, I don't know
week,
if we,
start brainstorming what we want to look into for the incorporation. What kind of
Like what things
Things
to
that we don't-
consider.
yes, yeah.
Like as we're going through and weighing where to incorporate and what type of incorporation, what are the things that we're scoring it against?
or yeah, if or when.
True,
we
yeah.
need
Like
to
what are the
incorporate.
things that would actually like be that? Which I think it kind of ends up being two sides of the same coin. when do we actually need to do it? So what are the things that it needs to help us with that we have to achieve?
I think not the main idea, but the idea of doing that one next and doing that one isn't just for TogetherTec. It's that we all probably have to incorporate our projects, and this is a something that would be beneficial to all projects for us to do that research and put it in, even if TogetherTec never incorporated, right? Even if it's just Comparati and Reason Score and stuff that actually incorporates to see what makes our individual needs. So,
right.
I mean, tax rate.
Yeah, and also and the decision of when to incorporate, because a lot of people do incorporate a little early, I think.
Yeah, I definitely incorporated Wiki election too soon. I mean, I kind of didn't. If the Kickstarter was successful, then I should have done it, but it wasn't, so it ended up not being useful. Right, so there's when to incorporate, which I guess really sort of ends up being like, what are the like the criteria for deciding when, like, oh, we definitely need to incorporate before X.
Is there another reason to incorporate besides financial reasons and legal reasons? Like for Wiki election, right? You incorporated because you had the crowdfunding, so you would have been taking in money. You could have possibly done that, I don't know, under Kickstarter without having done that, but it would have made you legally responsible, right? So like,
right, and the tax rate would have been way higher. In that case, it was mostly for taxes, yeah. To consider, and right, so we'll say there's financial reasons. I guess there are taxes. I think there are probably some like grants and stuff like that you could only get if you were actually like, you know, incorporated or a project or something like that, where they aren't just handing out money on the streets. There's the legal reasons. I guess I'll actually put that limited liability.
I was also like more like Wiki election has made money yet, right? And so there's a certain amount of like loss of a few thousand that we've done. So until you're kind of bringing it in, but if you can't make the money until you've incorporated,
she sound like a Charlie Brown teacher to
then of course there's something about like.
You're on mute, Bentley.
I guess we lost Jubilee.
Yeah, I think so. It's starting to sound like a Charlie Brown teacher at the end. I guess while we're waiting, can you guys think of any other reasons to incorporate or reasons not to? That's actually, I guess, another important thing, are reasons not to incorporate.
Why? The other direction is, what are the risks of not incorporating?
Right, yeah. Okay.
Which
I think falls in the same why to incorporate, right? Like you're trying to avoid those risks. One risk being, you know, paying too many taxes. Another risk being you're no longer limited to your liability, or you're not as limited.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say those need to kind of be spelled out, because if you say grants, that doesn't really that implies, if you know what you're talking about, that makes sense. But to someone who's not familiar,
okay, true.
Like, you know, and really that falls into, you know, yeah, because I mean, you can accept a grant without being incorporated.
Well, I think it will depend on the grant, right? Like some grants might require you to actually be an organization, so it's not just a person asking for money, and then some might. So I guess I'll put corporate grants. That's probably a better way to put it.
Well, I mean, I would say in specific grants that require you to be incorporated, because there are corporate grants could be grants from corporations, and some corporations don't care, right? So just being explicit.
No, that's good. I like it. There's definitely times where we write something down and they come back in a week and we're like, what does that mean? So, all right, so there's the corporate tax rates, where that's almost always going to be better than you just taking the money personally.
I mean, you get double taxed in corporations, unless you're an LLC.
You mean like if you're a sole provider?
No,
Or-
if you
or
have
how
a
do you mean you're double
corporation,
taxed?
your corporation pays tax and then you pay tax, at least in the U.S. So that's actually double taxation. And your salary is taxed at the same rate that you'd be taxed before. So
Right,
pay
like
more taxes
the
as a
company pays
corporation.
tax, and then you as a person, if the company is paying you a salary, you pay tax on that salary.
Yeah. So you're double
Right,
taxed.
yeah. So, well, I don't really consider that.
The total percentage of money that you lose to the government is higher. And but you
Right.
have tax write-offs
only
of
if
the
you're on
corporation.
salary though, and then that's just your wage salary, right?
Yeah.
Or
yeah,
your income tax.
Yeah, any earnings that come
There
from
is going to be a big, like, if we're incorporated in Canada and then Adriel and I are taking salaries, it's going to be completely different than Bentley having a salary, right? And so the difference between like, where we incorporate and where we're getting our salaries from, not just the currency, but also, like, where we pay, like, individual taxes and corporate taxes, right? That's going to, we should make the decision based on TogetherTec, but those are going to be parts that we need to talk about, right? If we're all Canadian, it makes sense. Does it make sense to do it in Utah or Iceland, or, you know what I mean? Those kind of things. That it's not just, it's like corporate taxes and personal taxes, the relationship between them.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, yeah, personal taxes get a bit different because then you're always going to be paying taxes in your country, right? Like I work for an American company, but I pay Canadian taxes. They pay me through a Canadian entity, and they pay their people in New Zealand through New Zealand and so on. But that company also pays then their corporate tax, I think mostly just in America because that's where they're incorporated. And so, like, if one of the projects were to take off, or if TogetherTec explodes and gets a whole bunch of income, then we'd be paying that corporate tax rate. And then if it has enough income to be able to start paying salaries, then each person pays tax on their salary in whatever area they are. But that, like, Bentley would be paying taxes in Texas/US, and then maybe locally, depending how it breaks down. But that would be the same if we incorporated in China.
But the question is whether that is because Salesforce is a global company that hires people globally, right? Even if they're out of America. So they may be set up that way and have had that, you know what I mean, all of this conversation before. That's not necessarily the way it just is, right? Like, if all of a sudden I started working for Facebook and it was out of America, I might have to pay American taxes. I don't know. And it might not, just because it's how one company works. I don't actually know if that's the case.
I've never heard of a citizen having to pay tax in a country they weren't a citizen of. Has anyone else? Like, I know people who are dual citizens that have to pay tax in both spots. I know people who are both Canadian and American and have to pay in both. And I know somebody who I think is in Amsterdam and America, and they have to pay in both. And then, it's like you pay the lower one at the lower rate, and then you pay the difference at the higher one in some cases. But it's based on where you're a citizen of, really. Like, if you're a Canadian citizen living in the US, technically you're supposed to be paying Canadian tax.
I think the main point is that it'll vary quite a bit, and the result will be, it's not a shoo-in that it will always be financially better to be incorporated. There are several situations where being a sole proprietor, I
think it's mostly a certain dollar value threshold where that's sort of why I incorporated. Was I said, like, okay, if this thing takes off and hits the right note where it actually gets people to say, like, oh yeah, I want to fix politics, that could explode. And then I was like, oh, okay, if it does explode, I don't want that to be taxed at the personal tax rate. I want it to be taxed at the corporate tax rate because it was less than half. So I'm like, okay, I would rather do that. But really, I think it only started to matter at like 150 or 200,000. Up until that point, it was roughly the same, just for me to take that as personal income.
One of the things that's coming up is, and I don't know which one it falls under, but I'm thinking, good, you've incorporated. Now you have to do taxes for that, even though you've made no money and done nothing, because you have a corporate tax system, which works completely differently. There's something about, like,
we added 8 reasons not to incorporate. And right now I have done as more. Yeah, because in theory, like, I actually am behind in my wiki election bookkeeping that I have to go do. And yeah, it's pointless because I shouldn't have incorporated.
But also, also where we incorporate, what those laws are for bookkeeping.
Right. Yeah, that's super important.
So that's one of the choices, right? Like,
how
often do you have to file taxes? under those, right? So under different states, you might have quarterly versus yearly, or you might have, that you have to have keep daily accounts versus like the amount that bookkeeping has to be done is going to be different between the places, even once we're
totally. Which I think then that starts to go into like the where do we incorporate and when, and like when does it happen at the state level, and when would you ever incorporate nationally for countries where that's a thing. I mean, in I think countries that don't really have states and provinces, you're always incorporating nationally.
Do we have another place to keep those notes though? So instead of like we know it's like when we're going to incorporate, right? That's kind of what we're doing right now, and that's this section. And there's like where we incorporate, and one of the things is bookkeeping, right? Like what the bookkeeping requirements are.
Okay, let's go here and go like major questions to answer. Oops.
Can it be simplified to we incorporate in a country when we see need for this to happen? I mean, if someone wants to give us a grant, corporate grant in, say, Estonia, then we incorporate there. If we get paid in our countries, then we incorporate there directly. And the interesting question here is, what is the like top level structure to for Google? It's the Google Corporation, and they have what's the name, subsidiaries in different countries, but they're all like daughter corporations, something like this,
right?
If I'm not mistaken. But in our case, it's not necessarily a legal structure. It can be as well a like smart contract in form of some DAO on some blockchain, for example. I mean, top level, we don't have to incorporate anywhere. We have to incorporate when we get paid, so we are legal and taxed properly and stuff.
Yeah, and I think to Bentley's point, if you're taking the tax as personal income, then you're definitely getting taxed twice because you're paying your personal tax, using that as kind of your organization's income, and then paying out your salary based on like from the money that's left over after your taxes, and then that gets taxed again. And so that I think it's like as soon as you're starting to pay multiple people, in my mind, you're really starting to get into like probably want to incorporate or at least heavily look into it to find that threshold for like what is the dollar value where it makes sense, which will largely be based on where you're incorporating. So it does seem like where is kind of the first question. But then there's also the fact of like the type of corporation. It's like in BC, there's your typical corporation, and then there's societies, where those are sort of like you're not for profits, and you can technically register as a charity, but that's way more work.
Do you have something like self-employment?
Yeah, I think you don't have to incorporate then. You're just paying it at the personal tax rate then. Like
so in the U.S., yeah, your default sole proprietor unless you do something specific.
Oh, so there's no need for a limited liability can be the reason.
With the sole proprietor in the U.S., is that a different tax rate, or is that still the personal tax rate?
No, it's just the personal tax rate. It's just what you call yourself when that's the default. Okay. Nothing else. I thought, but I mean, we have standard corporations, limited liability corporations, and there's several of each type. But there's also the new benefit corporations, which gives you a different legal protection. I'm wondering whether we even want to change the wording from incorporate, because I think are there some legal structures that are not
in BC? We call it all incorporation. Like when I was considering like starting a society, they were still calling it incorporation. So I mean, maybe in the US there's different terms.
It might be the same in the US.
Business structure? Choosing a business structure? Because there may be, right? Like especially if we're doing this for our individual projects as well. There's going to be times where sole proprietorship in Utah makes the most sense, or like a nonprofit in Estonia, like it's going to be different based on those. We're not necessarily going to have to fill out all this information, but saying, hey, here's all the information we want. And then figuring out, can we break that down? Are there more Game Bee people want to come and help us, collect that information and use it in a usable way so that we all have the.
I'm starting to think it's really, really complex. Maybe the best way for us to do it initially is just, we're going to be documenting on video how we're going to make the decision for TogetherTec. So that'll be of value. And then maybe a quick write-up, but maybe have it be a later task where we create kind of a guide on how to do that. And maybe there's existing guides out there, or we could collect together a list of guides from different countries that have them.
I bet you there is a guide on the states, like the different states and where to incorporate. And if we could find that, we could use the same metrics and start adding in countries. And
that's true. If we look at a couple of those, they'll give us the idea of what to think about when you're making the decision.
It'll just be all under American, so therefore there might be like American laws that won't apply other places or vice versa.
Yeah, we have to add a couple of
columns. Look up one for EU and one for the States. Which European country to incorporate? Although I don't know in Europe. Are you allowed to incorporate in a different country in the EU than you are living in? Or
I think a lot of countries have rules where like you have to be there, or a certain number of the people have to be there. Like for these societies, some of the people could be out of BC, but the majority had to be in BC.
Right. So let's ask Radek because he's in Europe. He looked like he knew the answer.
I think the answer is yes. I mean, it should be yes, of course, but I'm sure there's more to it. But generally, yes, I could open, for example, in UK, my own company without any problem. In fact, we had one once. It was more like a self-employment, but still it was a legal vehicle through which we could earn as ourselves, not be like full-time employees, just our own kind of working structure.
So you're talking about being a sole proprietor in the UK?
Yes, something like this. It's called self-employment, I think.
Okay, because that doesn't sound like incorporation. That just sounds like if you're allowed to work there, then you can work there.
No, I can work there, but working means being employed by someone.
Right.
And self-employment is like having your own corporation, almost. A legal structure. There's, I guess, the difference between
in
real
the EU, each person is their own corporation?
In Poland, it can be, yes. I mean, right now I have a very small self-employment thing, and I can sign B2B contracts, for example.
And Radek, is that mostly you're not in the UK, but you want to work for someone in the UK, so they need some way to kind of track you?
Before, when I lived in UK, it was, I was resident, so that was still different. Okay. I don't think I could be tech. Wow. Okay.
So that was when you were a resident in the UK.
Yeah, I'm thinking. It wasn't for the corporation I worked for. It wasn't possible to have employees in different countries. So I guess it wouldn't be that easy to be employed by a UK company, like without some sort of B2B agreement. But for this, I need to be at least self-employed officially, which means I own my own very one-person company. So
interesting. And is that only for like EU nations and other nations have that option, or like do Canadians and Americans have that option as well?
I don't know, but I signed. I created invoices for American company recently, and it was a B2B contract. It wasn't, strictly speaking, It wasn't much of a contract, but still I could, without any problem, create an invoice and get paid for some work which I did as business, not as like my person.
Right.
Personally.
Yeah. Well, sole proprietorships in both Canada and the US can enter in B2B agreements, right? Like you're still acting as a company. It's just like you sort of have an alternate name. You're like, I'm Adriel, or you can call me WikiLection. And then I can
Yeah.
sign agreements as WikiElection, but if someone sues WikiElection, they're suing me if I'm
Yes.
not incorporated through an LLC.
Yeah. So maybe the wording here should be, I mean, normally people think and write guides on how to get legal in the system. And what we are doing is we are trying to find correct interface for what we are doing, which is not in the system, but we need to interface with the system. So that's where the type of corporation matters. That's what we are choosing, how to interface with.
And I think like one of the important things in all of this, which I think has been brought up a couple times, is the when to incorporate, which sounds like a big thing there, is we only really need to start seriously considering it once TogetherTec is making X dollars, right? Like maybe it's over $1,000 a month, we start actually looking at it. But if it's, got $20 a month on Patreon or something, you wouldn't incorporate for that. And then it's, I mean, realistically, you wouldn't incorporate at 1,000 either, but that's just like an example of where you can start the conversation of really seriously like, okay, as of right now, if we're starting to grow and we can project, in 6 months, we'll have enough that, where we're currently residing and the person who's logging that income as personal income, it's going to make more sense to incorporate once they hit X.
Mm-hmm.
Which I guess then a part of it is when we're not incorporated, like how are we dealing with that non-incorporation? Where does it go? Is it, because theoretically that could be like, because I'll probably be renaming the WikiElection Corporation to Conferati and keeping it open, because at this point, I mean, I've already paid to have it opened. So like for things in Canada and maybe in the US, it could end up being, right, like for something like a Patreon or something like the Open Collective, I could end up using that bank account for that. But I guess the question is when does that become an issue? And what happens
right away, basically, because that might be piercing the corporate veil, right? Like if as much as you're my brother and I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna run my own Kickstarter, can we use that? Because it's under that bank account and it's an incorporated bank account, but like I feel like it starts to bring in legalities that aren't like under Open Collective though. That would be a different story.
That's what I mean. Is I don't want to reinvent that. I'm talking about using that as the bank account to power Open Collective, which it sounds like we weren't sure how international that was. Like, do you need, like, could Bentley do, like, you could do that for sure because we're both in BC, but could I help Bentley if Bentley wanted to set up a Patreon for Reason Score, or start not a Patreon, an Open Collective page? How would that work? Like, could I collect money on his behalf and then send him payment? How does that work if the bank account's in Canada? That's where it might get a bit weird.
Well, I don't think, because it's not a, when you work with an Open Collective, it's more like people are contractors and they're just doing a task. So there's no like employment agreement or anything. I mean, so we definitely need to look into it. But I think also to do Open Collective, it doesn't necessarily have to be your bank account. We just have to get one of the people on Open Collective to do it. But if we don't, then you could be the financial sponsor. And then the only reason you're using Open Collective is because it's an open accounting system. Everyone can see everything we spend the money on, which I think is good. And then Patreon would be separate.
Right.
Although it'd be interesting, maybe you could get the Patreon money to go into the Open Collective account. Yeah. But yeah, I think, I my gut would be that anyone from around the world should be able to participate in the Open Collective thing.
Okay, have you done
because you're not an employee?
Because I thought when we initially talked about it, it sounded like they don't provide the bank accounts, or the corporations or anything. Somebody has to sort of volunteer to be like, oh, you can deposit the money here, and then we'll figure out the paperwork stuff and blah, 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 blah.
Yes, but they help you find people that are volunteering to do that in the system. So the system it's a two-party marketplace of employment marketplace.
Right.
So, but there may not be anyone that's willing to take on our project, in which case it'd have to be you, but there might be.
Right. These seem like projects that if they're going to support anything, these seem like good candidates. So, okay, cool.
Yeah, and I thought it might be good to kind of take this conversation all the way back to initially we got the ball rolling because we were thinking of creating some Salesforce plugins.
Right.
Is everyone still thinking that that would be a good initial project? And then does that trigger the incorporation or not?
So that brings up a good so sort of a sidebar from that, which is, so the majority of what TogetherTec will be doing, in my mind, is not-for-profit work. Where in theory, if we wanted to do the extra work, we probably could incorporate as a society or a charity or something like that, where then we have to follow those rules. But like, because in my mind at least, there's no for-profit activity happening in the TogetherTec umbrella, that can incorporate however it wants. And then I think that there would end up being like a sister organization that would be the for-profit side for anything that wants to operate kind of like a for-profit company. But the idea is that there would be rules in that for-profit corporation that say X% of the profits go towards TogetherTec, or some form of like giving back that's written into that. Where I think that then becomes like, you've got your for-profit side that is incorporated as a for-profit company, and will sort of half behave as a for-profit company, but still with morals, and then having something that would operate like a not-for-profit, however that ends up being incorporated.
Yeah, the only thing is that you can do it all under a nonprofit. The only difference is that you can't have like dividends and stock disbursement, which if we don't anticipate, then we could still all do it under a nonprofit.
I think that's based on where you're incorporating.
You can make revenue.
I don't think you can do that. You can, but the bookkeeping gets to be a nightmare.
I mean, I don't know.
At least
my wife runs a non-profit association, and
they do for-profit stuff.
Well, it depends on your definition of for-profit. They have revenue streams. They sell books. They sell T-shirts. So that's the same as selling software services. The only thing is that end of the year, the money either goes into they don't give. There are no stockholders, and no one gets. There's no evaluation of stock, and there's no disbursement. There's no one gets a dividend. That's the only difference. So unless we're going to pay out dividends, I don't think we need a for-profit company for the American.
Including, like, you think about like Trump's organization where he had, like, you pay $1 million, or any foundation, you have like $1 million photos on the wall, and it's like, as long as you can pay your salary, you can do all the ridiculous things a for-profit company does. It just, you can't pay out profit to shareholders. So
to Adriel's point, the accounting could be more difficult.
Yeah. Although I guess
you have to kind of.
I think accounting is always a nightmare in nonprofit.
Yeah. Well, and corporations have a pretty high, in general, which a nonprofit is a type of a corporation, right? It's a 501c3. The C is corporation. But there's the accounting and the tax thing, because you do have to kind of prove that you're not.
Yeah, you have to. There are some things. Yeah, they have to prove to be a nonprofit. Like, you can't just register and then operate however you want. There's a lot of ways around. Like, you can get pretty close to doing whatever. Yeah, we give 1% of our proceeds to that, and the other 99% goes to the CEO.
Yeah. I'm just wondering. So I'm comfortable if Adriel's comfortable building those. Your current Wiki-Lexion, what is it currently?
It's just a corporation.
Okay, so standard corporation
in BC, yeah.
NBC. Yeah, so I mean, I'm fine doing all that, doing everything under that if you are, and then are we kind of saying that is TogetherTec, even though there's not a.
I mean, I'm not sure, because that's where it might get really weird. If like you're sharing bank accounts, there's multiple organizations. That's where, like, I think you'd want to have some structure, kind of like open collective.
I'm saying it's one organization and it's all under one name. I'm just saying our vision for TogetherTec is that now this.
Right.
Are they the same thing regardless of the name, or do we still want to have two separate entities?
Right.
I don't think we need two entities. I think it all be under one. But that's you, because this is your baby. And also the problem is that we're kind of agreeing that it's going to be nonprofit. but it's not structured.
Right.
It's not required to be nonprofit. So basically, we could all be really nice, and we don't have any ownership in the company. And then you decide, once we're making money, you could block us
Right,
all
yeah.
out and just
Thanks, guys. Peace.
Yeah, right.
Right,
So
yeah, 'cause
we
I'm
have
like
no
the-
legal protection
I'm
from
the
that.
sole owner of that corporation.
Right.
And yeah, and that's where I think it gets a bit weird. Where like I want to stay owning my own corporation, and then I think that, however, like the society system in BC would actually work somewhat decently for this, because there's multiple types, and one of them is you need 3 people to sign up, and then like you're a nonprofit, so then you get like tax breaks, or I mean I think effectively you're paying no tax.
Yeah.
As long,
Yeah,
like,
really, it's an association or society. Those
right.
are great.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure that. But I think part of the thing there was, I think over half of the people who like were on the I forget the term, the group of people who started it, had to be in BC, which theoretically we could do if we wanted to like start the TogetherTec cooperative society, or
Yeah.
whatever it was. Then we could start a society in BC. But yeah, is then effectively a corporation. You can open bank accounts and do all that stuff, and you can sign agreements. But
So
yeah, it's
for nonprofits, because we're going to be run as a nonprofit, whether we incorporate as a nonprofit or not. The idea before, with all taxes with corporations are you're paying it on the profit. So if we're not for profit, theoretically we don't have profit, so there's nothing to tax. Is there a reason to incorporate in like Utah where they have a lower tax rate? Like, am I missing something? What else would be under the jurisdiction if we don't have any profit to pay taxes on anyway? We have our income, but if we're paying income in our own countries and our own provinces and states, that doesn't matter either. So where am I missing something if we're not having profit?
Well, I mean, in the U.S., there are employment taxes. So the corporation has to pay half of my Social Security if I'm a quote employee and not a contractor. But I don't know enough of those details. But that is something other than the income. And nonprofits, I think, pay that as well.
Yeah, I think there are some other things besides profit, but profit is the main one. Which, yeah, I think to Julie's point, that is definitely a valid thing to consider if you're saying, hey, even if we are just a normal corporation, we're not going to be registering any profit because we don't, we aren't going to be paying anybody out. I think one of the questions that I was asking the lawyer I was talking to at that time that you didn't really have a great answer for was like, so what if you, get the money, but like it's donated and you want to like, for example, in the case of WikiElection, I was like, so what if it hits $1 million, And I was like, great, that could last me for 10 years. But then how does that work for being taxed? Because it's kind of profit, but it's also not profit. Is it like I'm going to be spending it for nonprofit purposes, but it's still money that I just got in a certain year for, a purpose. And that's where it sounded like it was sort of like there was a list of reasons of why the company was operating, and that was one of the unique things to registering as a society. Like you couldn't just go start a for-profit company like of any type and register as a society. There were certain things like, I think a sports organization, and there was something for like tech stuff that you could do it there. But there was definitely like, I don't think you can start a nonprofit oil company in BC.
Yeah, and I guess our first project is still probably those Salesforce plugins.
I think so.
And I don't even know what type of requirements, because you want to be in the Salesforce library or marketplace, right? So I don't know what requirements they have.
I don't think it's very high. Some of those apps are just made by people.
Okay.
Or like,
yeah. I mean, the big risk comes in that if you're the person or you're the corporation, then, and we don't have a contract, a legally binding contract, then it's all based on trust.
Right. Yeah. Which I personally think is okay, but I also don't think it's a good precedent to set. Like, I think part of this is setting a precedent on here's how you should operate, and no, other people shouldn't do that. and really, like, I'm okay with using the bank account for Open Collective. Mm-hmm. If I can avoid it, I'd rather avoid blurring the lines between corporations. I kind of want to operate as I've got my own corporation, and then I'm also on, whatever board, corporate structure, et cetera, we end up doing for TogetherTec. to sort of be both, because that's kind of like one of the prototypes for somebody who has their own project that's incorporated and then also involved in TogetherTec. That's kind of my personal goal, is to be both of those things, so I can sort of see how that plays out and what considerations there are, et cetera.
I guess it's tricky because I think if we, and we only got a couple more minutes, but if Radic and I, or let's just say me, because I know U.S. tax is better than other places. If I help you create that thing, but you're not paying me for it, and then I'm expecting payment based on revenue and sales, that sounds like an employee. I don't think I fit the contractor, or that actually sounds like more of a corporate owner. Like I have equity, right?
Yep, totally.
So it sounds
and that's where
like
that might just be like a partnership where that project is done through sole proprietorship until we get to the point where like, hey, it's starting to make money. Let's incorporate this somewhere. And then that might end up being in the US, because I expect you'll probably have a better tax rate in Texas than I do in BC.
Well, we don't have income tax in Texas. I do federally, but not statewide, which I mean is good, but I don't think that matters because that's my personal income, not the corporation's. And I would still incorporate in Utah. I wouldn't incorporate in Texas.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Fair. For somewhere in the US, right?
Yeah.
I don't think Canada has any tax havens. They're all. Alberta's okay, but I think compared to the US,
well, although mostly Utah, it's because of the legal protections. It's just easier to not get sued,
right?
More than the taxes, but yeah, we only got a couple more minutes. Anybody got any other thoughts?
Not really. While you were talking, I was like, oh yeah, we're going to have, it's not where we incorporate, but where you just like, are we employees? Are we contractors? How do we set it up so our taxes are the best without, but that's a completely different conversation of like, yep, how do we make sure the government can't come in and be like, actually, that'll be one of the easiest ways to shut us down, right? Is with taxes. And
totally. Yeah. And most likely, it sounds like we'd all be starting out as contractors, because I don't think we're going to be having full-time employment in an hour. Like, we'll actually, unlike a lot of the cases where things are using contractors and they're really not, this legitimately would be. And then, like, if we ever got, if we needed somebody to answer phones and they were working 9 to 5, that person would be an employee. But if
that's
it's like,
not really like in Canada, working for EI before, there was very, like, someone's like, oh, you're a contractor, but it was under Canada Revenue Agency can go back and be like, no, they're not.
Right.
Because it was based on, there was no black and white rule, that it was based on how much ownership you have over your employment. So if you're if you're a nanny and someone's telling you all of the stuff you're doing throughout the day, you're absolutely not a contractor. But if you came in and gave that, you could be a contractor. And so it's very set up.
I've been through this battle in BC for companies, and a lot of it had to do with like, do you get to set your own hours? Who provided your equipment? There's sort of like a checklist, and I think it was something weird, like, if you have like 5 of the 8 or something, then you're an employee.
That being said, we under that, you would never be considered, like, it was the employee who would go and be like, wait a minute, I was an employee, not a contractor, because I want to get EI, right? So if you're both saying, yes, I'm a contractor, there's it's a lot more fair than if one person's like, wait, I want to be an employee, and the other one's like, no, we want you to be a contractor. And so I feel like we have a bit of that protection baked in just because we're a cooperative, right?
Yeah. The only difference is, I think, if we're talking about the Salesforce things, then that wouldn't be an employee or a contractor. That would be an owner.
Right. Yeah. For like,
different.
If Bentley and I start, this thing to go and create an app, we both be owners. But then if that gets enough users, to like, oh, we're starting to get phone calls and we both have jobs and we don't really want to answer phones, so we, have enough money that we hire somebody in Texas. Now that person's an employee, because we're saying, all right, here's your hours. You're working 9 to 5. Here's the phone number. Here's your software. Here's your laptop. They're an employee.
I'm just saying that if your corporation is the owner of that product, then I have to have equity in your corporation.
Right. Yeah. And so I'm saying,
is that
corporation would not be the owner. My corporation is meant solely for WikiLection, Conferati, that thing where it's mostly going to be operating as nonprofit. And then I think this would start out as a sole proprietorship, where it's just 2 people working on stuff, and then we'd have an agreement between 2 people. And then at a certain point, once the company is making enough money, then we started about, okay, now let's incorporate, and where do we incorporate, and blah, blah, blah. And then there would be, like
I guess
corporate
technically
ownership. And,
in the US, that would be considered a partnership.
right.
Would be kind of it too.
If
There's
it's
more
not-
than one. Sole proprietor is one person.
Right, sorry,
There's
yeah.
the-
Yeah.
Two souls.
Yeah, right.
two separate sole proprietors as a partnership.
Yeah. So I guess you could just do a partnership and
I forgot
not
that
do a
term exists.
corporation. That's what I was trying to think through.
Yeah. And then I think, as always,
Be a contract.
corporation will be somewhere on the radar if things get successful, and there, is like, if it's just like, some drip funds, then we may never incorporate.
So
like, if it doesn't make sense to
Does anyone know? Because if you're a sole proprietor, it's very clear. If you're a partnership, it's somewhat clear that it's 50. Like, I'm thinking under marriage law and common law and that stuff that like if you don't have a prenup, this is what it is, right? Like if you don't have an incorporation where you can give differing shares to different people, if you are a partnership, let's say all four of us are a partnership, is it automatically that we each get 25% unless written otherwise, or is it because there is no documents, right? Just like with a sole proprietorship, there isn't necessarily a document.
If you took it to court, I think the default is yes, but then they would try to figure out who did what, right? Like if we all start a company, but Bentley does everything except like I buy the domain name and put up a placeholder, and he does everything else. If that went to court, he'd get like probably 90%. Because they're like, you guys did nothing. Why are we talking?
It would be, I think I don't know for sure, but I think it depends a lot on the judge. But in this case, I would say we would write up a contract. And just use DocuSign, and it may not be enforceable, but at least if something happened, and you got to remember, contracts are written for the divorce or for the disagreement. As long as you're agreeing, it doesn't matter. But it's
exactly, and that's when the best time to do it is when you're both getting along, entering into a partnership, as opposed to if there's a disagreement now you hate each other. Not the best time to be making those decisions.
Yeah.
So we're at the last few minutes. I just want to, so we weren't going to do this week. We're going to wait till we had already invoked this and then do this kind of next week. But now the two have reversed. Do we want to move this to another document so that it's not here for, you know what I mean? Like
I think
going through it, or leave it here and then we'll move it over later.
I think we will leave it here because I think that this is a part of the stuff that we want to talk to Raymond about. And if he's done this 20 times, he might have a lot more information about this. Like he might watch this back and be like, none of these people have any idea what they're talking about, which is a distinct possibility.
Technically, we got to say none of us are lawyers or tax accountants, so this should be taken as entertainment purposes only.
Very true. 100%.
For informational and entertainment purposes. Anyway, so since I'm in the U.S., the most litigious country, I think I should have said that at the beginning of that's my disclaimer. Can't sue me.
You're a legal representative. We're not that.
Yeah. See a medical doctor before. That's different.
Exactly. So should we say, are there any other closing? We'll be here back next week with Raymond, who will be here for our Friday the 13th. Hopefully we'll be invoking this. And hopefully it'll be our final one before we do this more officially.
Yep.
Otherwise. All right. Should we end? Goodbye, YouTube and Facebook.